So let's start with the World Cup thing because there is a religious tie-in to this. And let me pull this up here. This is the tweet that started it. You may have seen this one or heard this one. This is from Trump. This is his reaction to the U.S. women's national team losing their knockout stage match in the World Cup. And it's not surprising that he was happy. He was happy the women's team lost, basically because there are several members of the team who are outspoken liberals. They're pro-LGBTQ rights. So, of course, he somehow blamed Joe Biden for it. He gloated about the fact that Megan Rapinoe missed one of the penalty kicks, even though it wasn't the decisive kick, but frustrating nonetheless. But he was happy that she's the one who didn't end up scoring. None of this is out of character for Donald Trump. Like, that's the issue. None of this is surprising coming from him. But the thing that happened next is the thing that I really wanted to talk about. Let's see if you can see this. Here we go. So this is the tweet that Franklin Graham, the evangelist, put out there. And I'm going to blow this up a bit. Let's see. There we go. So this is Evangelist Franklin Graham then responding to the same issue. Again, the women's team lost the game. What's the right reaction for people to have? Now, if you love the country like all these America First people claim to, then you should be like, played a great game. We wish you the best. Sorry it didn't work out. Whatever. Here's Franklin Graham saying, I used to pull for our women's soccer team, but in recent years, they have shown disrespect for our country's flag and national anthem and have used their platform to promote the LGBTQ agenda. What he's talking about here is that when the women's team played their first preliminary round game, you saw some players, they have to stand up for the national anthem. I think that's a rule that the team has. But you saw some players not singing along, not putting their hand over their heart. And of course, conservative news outlets like flipped out over that because, they're traitors. They're representing our country on a global stage, but somehow they're evil because they're not singing the song we want them to sing. Just a completely bizarre reaction to any of that because, of course, they're patriotic just because they disagree with you or because they think our country ought to do better than it is. Guys like Franklin Graham and Trump think they're not patriotic. And, of course, there are people who are LGBTQ on the women's national team. They've used their platform to defend LGBTQ rights, so that's not a surprise either. And of course, Franklin Graham was mad about that. But look at what he went on to say. When they lost yesterday, I wasn't sad. I wish I didn't feel that way. But when players think it's more about them than the nation they represent, I can't support that. As if using the platform you basically get once every 4 years to talk about issues that matter to you. Because guess what? The World Cup lasts a few weeks. In the summer, once every 4 years. And then the rest of the time, they are doing whatever it is they do, like as if you're not going to use your platform to talk about things that matter to you. And then, of course, Franklin Graham quotes Donald Trump because, of course, he agrees with Donald Trump because he's a white evangelical Christian, saying woke equals failure, which is just the dumbest thing, as if like the millimeter that really decided the decisive penalty kick was the fault of woke. As if Sweden, the team that beat them, is somehow less woke, even though they actually have, I believe, more LGBTQ players on their team and, like universal health care and things like that, that probably make them socialists too. They have gun regulations. They have very progressive, relatively progressive LGBTQ rights. So if woke equals failure, Sweden should never have made it to the tournament, much less beat the US. And I think they just won again. So they're heading to like the semifinals or something. So the idea that woke is the reason the US lost makes absolutely no sense. The thing that actually makes me laugh about all this is these are the same people who demonize trans people, trans women, because they say we have to care about the sanctity of women's sports. It's always about women's sports. That's why they got to go after trans people. And yet when these women play a sport and then they lose, which is a thing that happens to every team but one, they're like, ha ha ha, see, you shouldn't have done the thing you did, because they don't care about women's sports. Like, all the people who are anti-trans and say it's in the name of sports, like, name some starring players in the WNBA. Name the starting lineup for a WNBA team. Name a swimmer. We'll get to this later when we talk about Richard Dawkins. But like, what is it that you didn't like? Franklin Graham, by the way, I'm going to share this with you. Franklin Graham did all of this. Here we go. He did this years ago. 4 years ago, when the women were in the World Cup, the soccer team was in the World Cup, he went against Megan Rapinoe, also citing Donald Trump at the time, and he said it's not appropriate for Megan Rapinoe to protest during the national anthem. She's the co-captain of the soccer team. She represents our country, but she's not respecting our flag and national anthem. So apparently, Rapinoe and the women's national team was too woke 4 years ago too. And how did they do then? Did woke equal failure then? No, they won the World Cup. They won it for the second time in a row. And this time they didn't have the power. They didn't have the team that they had those 4 years ago. So like, no one was really expecting them to win this time around, but it had nothing to do with the protests or anything these players talk about off the field or anything like that. I think this is just, it's so typical of not just Franklin Graham, but so many white evangelical Christians right now, because they just celebrate anytime our country has any sort of frustration. I'm not saying it's the soccer team losing is like American failure. It's low stakes. It's sports. But like, they refuse to honor anybody whose liberal politics don't line up with their own. Like, if the president is a Democrat, then they're happy when economic collapse happens. They will shut down the government to make it happen. If a governor somewhere is a Democrat, they want the state to have a budget crisis or a natural disaster. Like, it's always America first, unless the Americans in question are liberal, in which case, screw it. Let me show you, just for the record, what Joe Biden said about the women's team losing. Hey, U.S. women's national team, you've made your country proud. Congratulations on an incredible run. This team is something special, and I'm looking forward to seeing how you continue to inspire Americans with your grit and determination on and off the field. Like, that's the classy way to handle this. Franklin Graham could have said some variation of any of that. He could have thanked God for the team's accomplishments up to that point. He could have said, everything happens for a reason, or some other religious BS. And just said congratulations to the team because they represented our country. But that would require decency and empathy and civility. And Franklin Graham and Donald Trump and all those other MAGA people, like, they don't have any of that. They would much rather be jerks in the name of Jesus than just be a kind person for once in their lives. It's just absolutely infuriating.